This is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and military operations depicted are entirely fictional. Odin ran his perimeter every morning at first light. Same route, same speed. Clockwise around the property line, through the tree break behind the cabin, across the clearing, along the fence Colton hadn't finished yet, and back to the porch. Took him 11 minutes. He never varied. This morning, he varied. Colton Shea stood on the porch with his coffee and watched the dogs stop mid-route at the northeast corner of the barn. Odin lowered his nose to the floor, circled twice, then dropped to his front legs and started digging. Tail straight behind him, ears flat. Not playing, working. The barn was 3 walls and a roof Colton had rebuilt by hand over 7 weeks. New beams on old posts. He'd pulled the old tin, reframed the trusses, replaced every board that had gone soft with cedar he'd milled himself on a rented portable saw. The floor was original. Compacted earth, probably 80 years of logging boots and spilled diesel, pressed into something harder than concrete. He'd planned to pour a slab in spring. Odin apparently had other ideas. Platz. Odin stopped, looked at him, then turned back and kept digging. That got Colton's attention. Odin didn't refuse commands, not once in 3 years. Colton had picked him up from the canine retirement program in Salem after a buddy at Joint Base Lewis McCord sent him the listing. The intake officer had called the dog unmanageable, aggressive with new handlers, bit a trainer during evaluation, wouldn't take direction from anyone who hadn't earned it. Colton had walked him to the truck, said, "Fuss," and the 80-pound German Shepherd had heeled at his left side without a second of hesitation. Hadn't left that side since. The intake officer had stood in the parking lot with his clipboard and his mouth open. Colton had said, "Broken recognizes broken," and driven away. So when Odin heard Platz and chose to ignore it, that meant something. Odin, Platz. The dog didn't stop. His nails scraped and pulled. He'd opened a hole 6 inches deep, maybe 8 inches wide. Dirt sprayed behind him in short arcs. His breathing was fast, focused. He'd found something under there, and he wasn't going to quit until it was out. Colton set the coffee on the rail and came down the porch steps. November fog sat low in the clearing. It covered the valley floor most mornings this time of year, thick enough to eat sound and turn everything past 50 yards into gray nothing. The mountains behind the property disappeared completely. Just him, the barn, and a dog who wouldn't listen. His left knee ground on the second step. It always did in the cold. 14 halo jumps and 20 years of rucking would do that to a joint. The VA had offered him a brace and a referral to physical therapy. He'd taken the brace out of politeness and left it in the truck's glove box. Still there. He crouched beside the dog. 20 years in the group had taught him many things. One of them was when to stop giving orders and start paying attention. All right, show me. He went back to the cabin and came out with a short-handled shovel. Odin stepped aside. Colton widened the hole. The first 12 inches were solid, dense, layered, old, packed down by decades of weight and weather. Then the soil changed at about 14 inches, looser, darker, a different texture entirely, like someone had dug this spot before and filled it back in. Not 80 years ago, maybe 3, maybe less. The shovel hit metal. Colton set the tool down, used his hands. Careful, patient. You don't rush a thing in the ground. You clear around it first. Map the edges. Then you lift. The object was a box. Metal, rectangular, about the size of a hardback book. Rust covered the top and one side. The bottom was cleaner, protected by the soil beneath it. A simple latch, no lock. Whoever buried it wanted it found again, just not by everyone. He pulled it free and brushed off the dirt. Odin sat next to him, still, watching. Not sniffing the box, not pawing at it, just watching Colton's hands with that focused patience he carried into everything. Waiting. Colton opened the latch. Inside, a folded sheet of paper, damp at the edges, the ink blurred in places, but still readable. A roll of cash, hundreds, old bills, held by a rubber band that snapped the second he touched it. Bills fanned across his knee. He counted them. $2,200. And a second sheet, smaller. A column of numbers written in the same hand. G, P, S. Coordinates. 6 sets. No labels, no context, no dates. He unfolded the first sheet. A list of names. Handwritten, blue ink, block letters. Careful printing, like someone who wanted to be sure every letter was clear, even after years underground. 7 names, 1 per line. No headers, no explanation. He didn't recognize any of them, except the last one. Redmond. Colton stared at the name. Then he looked up at the barn, at the property around him. 40 acres of Douglas fir and red cedar, stretching from the valley floor to the base of the Cascade foothills. A cabin he'd wired and plumbed himself. A barn he'd roofed in the rain. A clearing he'd been turning into something that might matter for the first time in his civilian life. The Pine Haven Veterans Retreat. That was the name on the nonprofit paperwork filed 3 months ago. His retirement fund, his combat pay savings, and a VA loan he'd taken out against his better judgment. All of it sunk into a piece of ground where men who came back wrong could come and be quiet for a while. Silas Redmond had sold him this land 8 months ago. The closing had been at a title office in the county seat. Silas had worn a clean shirt and shaken Colton's hand twice. Once before, once after. Glad someone's putting the place to good use again. That's what he'd said. Colton remembered because it had sounded like he meant it. What did you leave me, Silas? Odin's ears rotated forward. He didn't move, but his eyes tracked Colton's hand as it folded the list and slid it into his jacket pocket. The fog held. The clearing was silent. The coffee on the porch rail had gone cold. The first set of coordinates put him 2 miles uphill from the property line. Colton left at first light the next morning. He ate standing at the counter. 2 eggs, black coffee, a piece of bread he didn't bother to toast. Odin ate his kibble in the same measured way he did everything. Bowl clean in 90 seconds. Not fast, not slow. Efficient. Then he was at the door, watching Colton lace his boots, waiting, without being told to wait. They took the old logging road north. Odin ranged ahead, nose working the ground in tight zigzags. His tail was level, body loose. He wasn't tracking a person. He was reading the terrain, cataloging it. 3 years of canine training had wired him for exactly this. The intake officer had written unmanageable on a form. What he'd meant was smarter than me. The road was overgrown, ferns pushing through the ruts, moss thick on the gravel. Nobody had driven it in months, maybe longer. But the road itself was solid underneath, built for heavy trucks, built to move weight downhill. The grade was steady, maybe 8%, cut into the slope at an angle that kept water from pooling. Somebody had known what they were doing when they put it in. Colton noticed things as he climbed. Cut marks on a cedar trunk 8 feet up, where a cable had been wrapped and tightened. A rusted chain link half buried in mud at a switchback. A section of road where the ruts were deeper than anywhere else, compressed by something heavier than a pickup. He filed each one without stopping. Intel collection. Old habit. The mountains looked nothing like the Hindu Kush, but the work was the same. Pay attention. Record. Pattern. The GPS beeped at 500 meters, then 200, then 0. Colton stopped. The clearing opened between Douglas fir trunks so thick a man couldn't have wrapped his arms halfway around them. Except some of them weren't there anymore. Stumps. 8 at the near edge, 2 more further back, half hidden by ferns. Cut clean and low, the saw marks still sharp. Sawdust clung to the bark edges. Not gray, not weathered. Months old at most. One stump still had sap pooling in the cut. You could smell it, sweet and resinous, mixed with the damp November air. He walked to the nearest stump and crouched. Old growth. The rings were tight and dense. 200 years, maybe 300. You couldn't buy this wood at a lumber yard. You couldn't plant it and wait. It grew on its own schedule, or it didn't grow at all. And it was worth serious money to the right buyer. Old-growth Douglas fir ran 4 to 5 times the price of second growth. A single trunk from one of these stumps could bring $15,000 to $20,000 at a specialty mill. Worth felony charges, too, if cut from federal land without a permit. Colton stood and scanned downhill. Drag marks in the soil. Shallow ruts from chains or cable cutting diagonal across the slope toward the south. He followed the angle with his eyes. South meant downhill. Downhill meant his property. He'd spent 20 years reading terrain for a living. Where the high ground was. Where supply lines could run without being observed from a road or a village. Where a 12-man ODA could move equipment through contested ground without leaving a signature anyone would notice from the air. Different country. Different cargo. Same math. The stumps were the source. The drag marks were the route. His barn was the staging area. Timber came down the hill, crossed his land on the old logging road, and went out to the county route. Clean. Hidden. Using access rights the seller had written into the deed he'd signed. Odin stood rigid at the far edge of the clearing. Body stiff. Ears locked forward. He'd gone still in that absolute way he had when he sensed something present but couldn't fix a direction for it. Not growling, not barking, just broadcasting stillness. His muscles were taut under his coat. He looked like a photograph of a dog. "I see it, buddy." Colton followed the drag marks downhill for a quarter-mile. They led into a natural ravine that would hide movement from the road below, then curved back onto the old logging road. The same road that ran through his property and connected to the county route 2 miles south. A truck could load timber at the clearing, run the ravine in the dark, cross his land, and be on the highway before dawn. Nobody would see a thing. He'd thought the box might be from a marijuana grow operation, old stash from whoever used the land before. That didn't track anymore. This was timber, federal timber, cut recently, moved recently. And whoever did it used his land as the corridor. He turned back. The fog was burning off. Through gaps in the canopy, he could see his cabin roof below. Small, square, clean against the gray. The retreat he was building. The thing he was trying to make real. Odin circled back to him. The dog kept glancing uphill, then at Colton. He wanted to go further. His body said so. Ears up, weight forward, tail still. But Colton had seen enough for one day. "Here." They went down. It took 40 minutes on the slope. Mud sucked at Colton's boots with every step. His right shoulder ached where the shrapnel scar crossed the muscle. Nuristan province, 8 years ago. The scar was a pale ridge of tissue running from his shoulder blade toward his collarbone. It tightened in the cold and loosened by noon. Most days he could ignore it. Today, the cold was everywhere. When he reached the trailhead behind the barn, Colton stopped. Fresh tire tracks on the logging road. Wide treads. Heavy vehicle. Deep in the mud. They hadn't been there when he left 2 hours ago. Someone had driven onto his property while he was uphill. Driven in and driven out. While the owner was 2 miles away, looking at their stumps. Odin's hackles rose. He stood at the edge of the tracks and sniffed. Rapid pulls of air through his nose, sampling. His head turned north, then south, then locked south, toward the county road, toward whoever had just left. Colton crouched and studied the tracks. New tread pattern. Deep heel on the right side, which meant the truck had been loaded heavier on the passenger side going out, carrying something, coming in light, going out heavy. He studied the tire marks, checked the barn, scanned the road. He went inside and locked the cabin door. First time he'd done that since he moved in. The names on the list were easy enough to find. Colton sat at the small table in the cabin with his laptop open and the damp sheet of paper smoothed flat beside it. Rain drummed on the tin roof. Steady, patient, like it planned to be there all day. The wood stove put out enough heat to keep the main room warm. He'd split 3 days' worth of cedar before breakfast. The routine helped. Kept the hands busy while the mind worked on what to do with 7 names and 6 coordinates. Odin lay near the stove. He'd carried a stick up from the creek on their way back and dropped it at Colton's feet when they came inside. Then he'd picked it up again and brought it to his spot near the warmth. He did that sometimes. Carried things close. Didn't want to play with them. Just wanted them near. Colton understood that impulse more than he wanted to admit. 3 names came back right away. County tax records, business filings, all connected to Ridgeline Timber, a logging company registered in the county seat 20 miles east. 2 listed as current employees, 1 as a subcontractor, last payment recorded 18 months ago. The 4th name turned up nothing useful. Wrong spelling, maybe. Or someone who'd left the area and taken their records with them. The 5th was the same. Dead ends. The 6th name was Hank Graves. Colton typed it into the county newspaper archive. One result, 3 years old. Pine Haven man killed in logging accident. Hank Graves, 38, died Saturday when a tree fell during a cutting operation on private land east of town. The county medical examiner ruled the death accidental. Graves had been employed by Ridgeline Timber for 6 years and was described by co-workers as experienced and careful. He is survived by his wife Delilah and no children. Ridgeline Timber. Same company, same list, same buried box. Colton read the article a second time, then a third. The facts were thin. 3 paragraphs, no details about the investigation beyond ruled accidental. No quotes from coworkers other than the 2-word description. No follow-up story. No second article. No op-ed. No letter to the editor. A 38-year-old man died on a job site, and the local paper ran 3 paragraphs, and the town moved on. He leaned back. The chair creaked. Odin lifted his head from the stick and watched him. The dog's ears were up, alert, reading him. The 7th name was Redmond. Silas Redmond. Owner of Ridgeline Timber, according to the Oregon Business Registry filed 4 years prior. The man who sold Colton this property. The man who shook his hand at closing and smiled. The man whose name sat at the bottom of a list, buried in a barn floor alongside his own dead employee. 6 sets of GPS coordinates pointing to federally protected timber, and $2,200 in cash nobody was supposed to find. Colton closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet and let the cabin settle around him. The stove ticked. Rain hit the glass in gusts. The room smelled like cedar smoke and damp wool, and the coffee he'd reheated twice and still hadn't finished. 7 names, 1 dead. 6 coordinates on federal land where old-growth trees used to stand. Cash. All of it under a floor in a barn that Silas Redmond used to own. All of it now on property that Colton owned. The question wasn't what it meant. He already knew what it meant. The question was what he was going to do about it. He didn't want to do anything about it. That was the honest truth of it. He'd spent 20 years making calls, choosing windows, accepting consequences. He'd bought this land specifically so he could stop doing all of that. Build something quiet. Let the weight settle. Let the dog run his perimeter every morning, and the fog roll in from the valley, and the world stay the size of 40 acres and a gravel road. He didn't need more problems. He needed fewer. And now a metal box was pulling him back into the business of deciding things that affected other people's lives. Then a different list surfaced. He didn't ask for it, didn't invite it. It arrived without warning and without permission. the same way it had every few weeks for 8 years, whenever he sat alone too long with his thoughts. 12 names on a whiteboard at the FOB in Nuristan. Black marker. His handwriting. His ODA. 12 men. His responsibility. Staff Sergeant Vasquez at the bottom of the list. Added last because he joined the team 3 weeks before deployment. 23 years old. An 18 Delta Special Forces medical sergeant who could field strip a trauma kit faster than anyone Colton had seen in 17 years in the group. First rotation overseas. Always smiling. Always asking questions about the villages they patrolled, the language, the families who watched them from doorways. Good questions. The kind Colton wished more operators bothered to ask. 30 seconds. That was the gap between the call to move and the first RPG. Colton had chosen the window. 0430. First light. Soft ground from overnight rain. Move through the orchard, cross the road, set up overwatch on the compound to the east. Standard patrol. Routine. They'd run the same route twice already that rotation, without contact. Except the third time, the route had been compromised, and nobody knew it. 30 seconds after Colton gave the hand signal to step off, the tree line erupted. Vasquez caught 2 rounds through his plate carrier's gap before he'd taken his 4th step. The rounds hit below the armpit, where the side plate didn't cover. Colton reached him in 8 seconds. The kid's eyes were open. He was trying to talk. His mouth moved, and nothing came out. Colton put pressure on the wound and called Kazovac and told Vasquez he was going to be fine, which was a lie. And Vasquez knew it was a lie. And he died looking at Colton with an expression that wasn't anger or fear. It was confusion. Like he couldn't understand how the morning had gone this wrong, this fast. 30 seconds earlier, they'd have cleared the kill zone. 30 seconds later, they wouldn't have stepped off at all. Colton chose the window. He'd replayed it 10,000 times in 8 years, and the math never changed. The answer was always 30 seconds. The cost was always Vasquez. Odin whined. Soft. Low. A check-in. The dog hadn't moved from the stove, but his eyes were fully on Colton now, focused, reading. His nose twitched. Then he stood, walked over, didn't press against Colton's leg, didn't put his head on his knee. He picked up the stick from the floor and set it carefully on Colton's boot. Then he sat down next to the chair and looked at the door. Not anxious, not demanding, just offering a direction. Outside. Forward. Anywhere that wasn't this table with these names and this silence. A gift and a redirect, both at once. I'm here. Colton pulled a hand down his face, blinked, picked up the sheet, looked at it. He didn't want to make calls on this, didn't want to be the one deciding what these names meant and what came next. He'd been that person before. He knew what it cost. He knew it down to the exact number of seconds. But the drag marks led to his property. The tire tracks were on his road. The dead man's name was on a list he'd pulled from his own barn floor. He wasn't choosing to be involved. He was already involved. Had been since the day he signed the deed. Town. Tomorrow. Odin set his chin on the stick between his paws and closed his eyes. The rain kept falling. The cabin held. Pinehaven had one traffic light, one gas station, and a hardware store that opened at 7. Colton was there at 6:50. Odin waited in the truck bed, head over the side, watching the empty main street with the patience of something that had been trained to wait and had gotten very good at it. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. The fog was thinner in town. A few storefronts had lights on. The diner across from the courthouse. The post office. A woman was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the thrift shop with a broom that was missing half its bristles. She glanced at the truck, at the dog, and went back to sweeping. A county cruiser sat parked at the far end of the block. Engine off. Nobody in it. Colton noted the plate number. Moved on. Inside the hardware store, he picked up fence wire, a box of 3-inch screws, and a tube of construction adhesive. Brought them to the counter. The man behind it was 60, maybe older. Flannel shirt. Reading glasses on a cord around his neck. Hands that had been doing physical work for decades. Name tag said Warren. Mornin'. Mornin'. You're the one bought the Redmond place. It wasn't a question. In a town of 2,800 people, a new face buying a derelict property made the rounds fast. That's right. Doing some work up there, I hear. Walls, roof, the whole 9 yards. Warren rang up the wire, slow and deliberate, like he rang up everything. Brave man. That property sat empty a long time. How long? Since Silas moved out. 3 years, give or take. He used to run his whole operation from there, you know. Timber trucks in and out at all hours. His crews coming and going at dawn. Then one day, nothing. Locked the gate, moved to that house on the river, and didn't look back. His operation still running. Warren glanced up. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear, the careful look of a man who'd lived in the same small town as a powerful person for a long time, and had learned exactly which words were safe to say out loud. Silas Redmond owns half the timber rights in this county. His operation's always running. One way or another. He bagged the screws and the adhesive and didn't say anything else. Colton paid cash, took the bag, walked out into the cold. The sheriff's cruiser was gone from the end of the block. In its place sat a red pickup truck idling at the curb. New model, clean paint, chrome toolbox in the bed, mud on the wheel wells that looked fresh, the kind that came from a logging road in the mountains and hadn't had time to dry. Colton clocked the mud first, then the man. Tall, late 50s, silver-gray hair under a ball cap, tan jacket over a flannel shirt, work pants, boots that were clean in the way boots are clean when they don't get used for actual work. He leaned against the driver's door with his arms folded, watching Colton come out of the store. The look was casual. The attention was not. Odin growled from the truck bed, low, continuous. Not a warning bark, something deeper. He dropped into a half crouch, head forward, weight on his front legs. The fur along his spine stood in a ridge. He hadn't made this sound since the day Colton brought him home and the neighbor's kid ran toward them too fast. The man smiled. So you're Shay. Colton set the bag in the truck bed, kept his hands visible, didn't answer. Silas Redmond. The man pushed off the door and extended a hand. Figured I'd come introduce myself proper, being neighbors and all. We met at closing. Closing's paperwork. This is courtesy. Silas held the hand out for a second longer, then let it drop. No offense taken. No offense given. He was practiced at this, good at the space between what he said and what he meant. I hear you're turning the place into some kind of retreat for veterans. That's right. Good cause. Silas nodded once. His eyes moved past Colton, to the truck bed, the tools, the fence wire, the dog that hadn't stopped growling. Back to Colton. Slow. Measuring. Place was in rough shape when I left it. Lot of history in those walls. Hope you didn't find too many surprises. Surprises? Silas smiled. Smaller. Tighter. Old property. Things get left behind. Things get buried. You find anything interesting under that barn? The words landed clean and flat. No inflection, no wink, no humor behind them. But Colton heard it. 6 years of working in contested villages overseas had tuned his ear for the thing underneath the thing being said. The question wasn't a question. It was a measurement. Silas knew about the box. He wanted to know if Colton did. Barn's in good shape. Glad to hear it. Silas tapped the side of his truck with 2 fingers. 2 short taps. Like closing a ledger. Well, welcome to Pine Haven, Shay. You need anything at all. I'm 12 miles downriver. Red mailbox. Can't miss it. He got in the truck, closed the door, pulled away slow and clean down Main Street. No hurry, no backward glance. The kind of departure that said, I'll see you again, and we both know it. Colton stood in the parking lot. Odin repositioned himself in the truck bed, body angled between Colton and the direction the red pickup had gone. The growl faded to silence, but the dog didn't sit, didn't relax. His eyes tracked the road long after the truck had disappeared past the gas station and around the bend toward the river. Colton looked down at his hands. Steady. They were always steady. That was the problem with decades of training. It kept the outside still, even when the inside wasn't. He got in the truck and pulled out of the lot. Made it about a mile toward the property before he checked the mirror. A county cruiser had fallen in behind him. Not close, not aggressive, just there. Following at the exact distance that said, I know you can see me, and I don't care. He pulled into his driveway. The cruiser followed. A deputy climbed out. Young, heavyset, jaw clenched tight enough to show the muscles working under his skin. Sunglasses on despite the overcast. Badge on his chest said Keen. Afternoon. Doing permit inspections in the area. You got renovation permits for that structure work on the barn? Colton stood by his truck. Odin was still in the bed, ears forward, watching the deputy. Not growling, just watching, taking the measurement. All filed with the county office. You're welcome to check. Keen didn't fully get out of the car. He leaned against the open door and scanned the property. The barn. The cabin. The woodpile. The clearing where Colton had been grading ground for the retreat area. the dog. His eyes stayed on the dog for an extra second. "I'll be back if anything's not in order." He drove off. But he didn't go far. Colton could see the cruiser parked on the shoulder a quarter-mile down the road. Just sitting there, engine idling, exhaust rising into the cold air, like a signal. 30 minutes later, it was still there. Odin jumped from the truck bed and walked to the porch, sat at the top of the steps, watching the road. Not tense, patient, the way he watched everything that showed up where it didn't belong and hadn't been invited. Yeah. Colton sat on the step beside him, set his elbows on his knees, looked at the cruiser, the road, the trees, the fog closing in again from the valley floor. I noticed too. Silas Redmond had sold him this property. Silas Redmond had shown up in town the same morning Colton did, and 10 minutes after Silas drove away, a county deputy arrived to ask about permits Colton had already filed. That wasn't a coincidence. Colton didn't believe in coincidences. 20 years in Special Forces had beaten that habit out of him by his second deployment. He sat on the porch with his dog and watched the cruiser and let the picture fill in. The picture was getting clearer. He didn't like what he saw. The county courthouse was a brown brick building 2 blocks off Main Street. Old, functional. The kind of building that got put up in the 1940s and never saw a single renovation because nobody could agree on who would pay for it. The bricks were stained with decades of rain running down from a gutter that had been broken for at least 5 years. The front steps had a crack running through the third one from the top. Colton found the land records office on the 2nd floor. Small room. Filing cabinets against every wall, the old metal kind with dents and peeling labels. One desk near the window with a view of the parking lot and the diner across the street. One woman behind the desk. She had dark hair pulled back tight and reading glasses sitting halfway down her nose. She was writing something in a large ledger with a pen that moved in sharp, exact strokes. Each entry precise, each line straight. She didn't look up when Colton walked in. The room smelled like old paper and the heating vent that needed a new filter. "Help you?" "I need records on a property transfer. The old Redmond parcel, east side of the valley." She looked up now, took off the glasses. Brown eyes, a face that was careful about what it showed the world. 40, maybe 41. Lines at the corners of her eyes that could have come from sun or from years of holding an expression in place. She studied him the way people in small towns study new arrivals. Not hostile, measuring. "You're the buyer." Colton Shea. "Delilah Graves." She didn't offer a hand. "I processed that transfer 8 months ago." "Then you know the property." "I know the paperwork. That's what this office does. Paperwork." She put the glasses back on, opened a desk drawer, pulled out a folder with a blue label, set it on the desk between them. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Transfer history, timber rights, anything attached to the deed that I might have missed when I signed." "Might have missed?" One eyebrow lifted, just slightly. "That sounds like something your lawyer should be telling you." "I don't have a lawyer. I'm looking at public records." She held his gaze for a beat. Then she pushed the folder forward. "Public documents. Help yourself." Colton opened the folder and started reading. Standard sale documents. Title history going back 40 years through 3 owners. tax assessments, survey maps, and at the back, stapled separately in its own section, a timber extraction rights addendum. 4 pages of small print in legal language dense enough to discourage any buyer who wasn't specifically looking for trouble. Colton had not been looking for trouble 8 months ago. He'd been looking for a place to build. He'd been in a hurry to close, in a hurry to start. He'd signed where the title agent pointed and shaken hands and driven out to his new property with a dog in the passenger seat and a toolbox in the bed, and a head full of plans that didn't include reading 4 pages of fine print. This addendum, Section 4, Retained Mineral and Timber Extraction Rights. What does that mean in practice? It means the seller kept the right to access the property for resource extraction, specifically timber. It's unusual for a residential sale, not common at all, but it's legal if both parties sign, and both parties signed. He can come onto my land for the stated purpose, timber extraction. If he holds a valid county permit, yes, him or anyone he authorizes to act on his behalf. Does he have a valid permit? She held his look. Her expression didn't change. That's not my office. Permit office is down the hall. Second door. Colton turned another page. At the bottom of the deed, a list of parcels referenced in the extraction clause. Federal land designations, lot numbers from the National Forest Survey. These parcels, they're all federal? National Forest land, yes. But the extraction rights run through my property. The right-of-way does, for transport. That's how timber operations used to move logs from federal leases through private land to the county road. Standard setup 30, 40 years ago when the mills around here were running full capacity. Most of those agreements expired when the leases ended. Yours apparently didn't. Colton reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the handwritten list, still creased from being folded inside the metal box, still faintly damp at the edges. He set it on the desk next to the open folder. Do you know these names? Delilah leaned forward, read down the list, one name at a time, slow. Her hand, the one holding the pen, stopped moving. The pen hovered above the ledger, not shaking, not dropping, just stopped, held in the air by fingers that had forgotten what they were doing. Where did you get this? Under the barn floor, buried in a metal box. She stared at the paper. Her face was controlled. Her breathing was controlled. Everything about her was controlled in the way of someone who had practiced control for a long time and had gotten very good at it. But the pen hadn't moved, and it wasn't going to move until this conversation was over. The 6th name on that list. I see it. Hank Graves. County paper says logging accident, 3 years ago. Employed by Ridgeline Timber. Delilah set the pen down, removed her glasses, folded them precisely, and placed them on the desk beside the ledger. Then she looked past Colton at the wall behind him. Her jaw tightened. One muscle. Small movement. Anyone else would have missed it. Hank Graves was my husband. The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked. Colton could hear a truck downshifting on Main Street 2 stories below, and the radiator clicking in the corner, and his own breathing. I'm sorry, Don't be sorry. Her voice was flat, level, the kind of level that costs something to hold in place. Be specific. What exactly did you find under that barn? And why are you bringing my dead husband's name into this office 3 years after he was buried? Colton told her. He kept it factual, spare, the way he'd learned to deliver after-action reports. No opinions, no speculation, just the sequence. The box, the coordinates, the stumps on federal land, the drag marks leading to his property, the extraction rights addendum she'd just shown him. Silas Redmond's visit in town that morning, the question about the barn, the deputy who showed up 10 minutes after Silas drove away. She listened without interrupting. Her hands stayed folded on the desk. Her eyes stayed on his face. When he finished, she sat in the quiet for a long time, long enough for the radiator to click through its full cycle and start again. I need to think about this. I understand. Come back tomorrow. All right. Colton stood, picked up the list from the desk, folded it, put it back in his pocket, walked to the door. Delilah? She looked at him. I'm not trying to cause trouble. That's not up to you anymore, Mr. Shea. He left, went down the stairs and out the front door into the cold. The air was damp and smelled like rain that hadn't started yet. He could see his breath. In the parking lot, Odin had jumped from the truck bed and was standing on the sidewalk. He wasn't looking at Colton. He was looking at the courthouse steps. Delilah stood in the doorway, arms folded against the cold, watching them go. Odin walked toward her, not fast, not hesitant. 3 steps, 4, 5. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and sat, looked up at her, then turned his head and looked back at Colton. Here. The dog hesitated. He held Delilah's gaze for another second. Then he stood and came back. Slow, deliberate, like he was making a note of something he planned to revisit. Colton opened the truck door. Odin jumped in the bed. Colton started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Delilah stood on the courthouse steps with her arms folded. She hadn't moved. She was still watching when he turned the corner and lost sight of her. He drove out of town. The rain started before he hit the property line. Heavy drops that broke on the windshield and ran down in crooked lines. 3 years. She'd carried it for 3 years. The name on a police report. The husband who drove to work one morning and came home in a county coroner's van. Nobody had asked the right questions. Nobody had shown up with a metal box and a dead man's name and said the words out loud. Until a man with a dog and a shovel decided to stop telling himself it wasn't his problem. Odin rode in the truck bed, head up, ears forward, rain beating on his coat and running off in streams, watching the road ahead with the steady focus of something that had already decided where it was going, even if the man driving hadn't figured it out yet. Delilah called the next morning. Colton was on the cabin roof, patching a section of flashing that had started to lift in last night's wind. Odin lay on the ground below, head between his paws, watching him work. Every few minutes the dog would stand, circle the cabin once, then come back and lie down in the same spot. Perimeter check, even while resting. The phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Unknown number. Shay, it's Delilah Graves. I've been thinking about what you showed me. He sat on the roof edge, boots hanging over the gutter. The valley was socked in with fog again. He could hear a truck on the county road a mile away, but couldn't see it. And I'm not doing this over the phone. Come to the property. Bring the list and the coordinates. Your office? Your property. I'll come to you. Noon. She hung up before he could respond. Colton looked down at Odin. The dog looked up at him. Neither of them moved for a moment. Guess we're having company. Odin's tail moved once. Small. Controlled. As close to enthusiasm as the dog got before noon. At 12, a gray sedan pulled up the driveway. Delilah got out, carrying a canvas bag and a cardboard tube. She wore a rain jacket and boots that had actually seen mud. She scanned the property, the cabin, the barn, the half-finished fence, the clearing with the survey stakes Colton had been setting for the retreat area. Her expression was professional. She looked at Odin, who stood at the edge of the porch, watching her with his ears forward and his body still. Does he bite? Only people I tell him to. She looked at him. He didn't smile. She didn't either. But the air between them shifted just slightly. Not warmer, just less guarded. They set up at the workbench in the barn. Colton had cleared it that morning. Delilah unrolled a county survey map from the cardboard tube and spread it flat, weighing the corners with wrenches from Colton's tool rack. Then she opened the canvas bag and pulled out photocopies, land transfer records, timber lease histories, permit applications going back 12 years. She'd been busy since yesterday. I pulled everything the county has on Ridgeline timber and the parcels referenced in your deed. You had access to all that? I'm the land records clerk. I have access to anything that's been filed with the county. And Silas has filed a lot over the years. She pointed to the map. Your property, here, 40 acres. The logging road runs north-south through the eastern third. The extraction rights clause in your deed gives the holder access along this corridor. Silas, or anyone he designates. She traced the road north on the map with her finger, past the property line, into the green shading that marked federal land. The road crosses your boundary here and enters National Forest. These 6 parcels. She laid the GPS coordinate sheet next to the map, pulled out a pencil, and marked each coordinate on the survey. Precise dots. Careful hand. 6 dots. All on federal land. All along the ridge above Colton's property. All connected by the same logging road that ran through his barn clearing. Every one of these coordinates is inside the National Forest boundary. I checked against the federal lease registry this morning. No active timber lease has been filed for any of these parcels in 7 years. Meaning nobody has legal permission to cut up there. Meaning nobody has filed for legal permission. Whether someone cut anyway is a different question. I was up there 2 days ago. Somebody cut. She nodded slowly, pulled another sheet from the bag, a timber extraction log from the county assessor's office. Ridgeline Timber had reported 0 board feet harvested from federal land for 3 consecutive years. 0 permits applied for. 0 fees paid. 0 reported. But your stumps say otherwise. My stumps say a lot. She sat back on the stool. Odin had come into the barn during the conversation. He stood between them, head tilted slightly, watching Delilah's hands on the map. He hadn't growled, hadn't tensed, just observed, taking his own measurements. There's one more thing. Delilah pulled the coordinate sheet closer, pointed to the last set of numbers, the sixth coordinate. This one is different. Colton looked at it. It was further south than the others, closer to the boundary between federal and private land, off the main ridge. I checked this against the county GIS system this morning. This coordinate doesn't correspond to a timber harvest site. She paused, her hand flattened on the map. It corresponds to a section of private logging road, a switchback, quarter-mile above the old Ridgeline operations yard. Steep grade, heavy canopy. What happened at that switchback? That's where Hank died. The barn went quiet. Rain tapped on the tin roof in irregular patterns. Odin shifted his weight from one front paw to the other, but didn't move. The accident report says a tree fell during a cutting operation. Operator error. Hank was standing at the turn. The tree came down on him. Case closed in 48 hours. Her voice was controlled, flat, but her hands, folded on the map, pressed hard enough to whiten her knuckles. I asked questions afterward. Nobody wanted to answer them. The sheriff said it was an accident. Ridgeline's insurance paid the claim. Hank's crew foreman said these things happen in the woods. And I sat in my office and filed the death certificate and told myself that sometimes things just happen. But you didn't believe it. Hank called me the night before he died. She looked at Colton straight. Her eyes were dry, hard. He said he'd found something at work he shouldn't have found. He said he was going to call a reporter in the morning. He said, "Dell, if anything happens to me, look in the barn." The barn. This barn. This barn. He worked out of this property for years. He knew every inch of it. He knew where the soil was soft under the northeast corner. She looked at the floor, at the spot where Odin had dug, at the hole Colton had widened with a shovel. I never came out here to look. I told myself it was grief talking. I told myself he was being dramatic because he was upset about something at work. I told myself a lot of things for 3 years. Colton stared at the map, at the sixth coordinate, at the pencil dot marking the spot on a switchback where a 38-year-old man died one morning, and everyone agreed it was an accident, except his wife, who nobody listened to. Hank Graves found out about the illegal timber. Hank Graves planned to talk, and Hank Graves died before he could. And the evidence he buried waited under this floor for 3 years until a dog who didn't follow orders dug it up. This isn't timber theft anymore. No. Delilah's voice was very quiet. It isn't. Odin walked over to Delilah and sat beside her stool, not leaning on her, not pressing, just close. His tail rested flat on the dirt floor. He looked up at her once, then looked at the door. Calm, present. She looked down at him. Her hand moved, stopped, moved again. She rested it on top of his head, briefly, then pulled it back. Smart dog. He knows things before people do. Colton drove Delilah to the sixth coordinate the next morning. They took his truck up the logging road as far as it would go, then walked the last quarter mile on foot. Odin ranged ahead on the trail. The slope was steep and narrow. Switchbacks cut into the mountainside every 100 yards. The canopy was heavy overhead. Douglas fir and western red cedar, their trunks close together, blocking most of the sky. The air smelled like wet bark and old moss, and the faint sweetness of decomposing needles. The switchback was obvious when they reached it, a sharp turn in the road where the grade dropped off on one side into a ravine. Above it, a wall of trees, and at the apex of the turn, a stump. Not old growth, a younger tree, maybe 60, 70 years, but cut the same way as the ones on the ridge. Low, clean. Saw marks still visible under a layer of moss that had started to reclaim the surface. This is where it happened? This is where they said it happened. The tree fell across the road. Hank was standing at the turn. The report said he didn't move in time. Colton crouched at the stump, studied the cut angle. He ran his finger along the saw line. Then he stood and looked downhill, then uphill, then at the stump again. The angle was wrong. A tree cut for harvest gets felled downhill. You cut a notch on the downhill side, then saw from the uphill. Gravity does the work. The tree falls away from the cutter and away from the road. Any first-year logger knows this. A man with 6 years of experience would never stand where this tree was aimed to land, unless he didn't know it was coming. The cut angle goes against the slope. Delilah looked at him. What does that mean? You don't fell a tree uphill unless you have a specific reason. It's dangerous, it's harder, and a logger with Hank's experience would never stand at the landing point of an uphill fell. He pointed at the stump. This tree was cut to fall in exactly one direction, across the switchback, onto whoever was standing at the turn. Delilah stood at the edge of the switchback. She looked at the stump, at the ravine below, at the spot on the road where her husband had been standing 3 years ago when a tree fell on him and everyone called it an accident. Odin stood between them. His tail had dropped low, not tucked, just low. He sniffed the stump once, then backed away from it. He didn't want to be near it. Hank knew about the timber. He was going to talk, and Silas made sure he didn't. We don't have legal proof, not yet. We have a cut angle and a set of coordinates. A prosecutor would need a forensic analysis of the stump, a logging engineer's testimony. So we're stuck. Not stuck. Incomplete. Colton looked at her. Hank called a reporter the night before. If we find that reporter, and the reporter remembers what Hank said, that's a witness to intent. Combined with the coordinates, the list, the illegal harvest, and the cut angle, it builds a case. The reporter left Pine Haven 2 years ago. Ed Faulkner. I've got a number for him in Portland. Then we call him. They hiked back down. Neither of them spoke. Odin walked behind them this time, not ranging ahead, guarding the rear. The reporter was a dead end. Colton spent that evening on the phone. Ed Faulkner's Portland number went to voicemail. He left a message. Called again the next morning. Voicemail again. Found a second number through a press association directory. This one rang 6 times and went to a fax machine. He tried the newspaper's current office and got a receptionist who said she'd never heard of anyone named Faulkner. He sat on the truck tailgate after dark. The rain had stopped for the first time in 3 days. The sky was clear. Stars showed through gaps in the canopy. Bright. Close. The kind of sky you only got when there was no town glow to wash it out. Odin lay on the ground beside the truck, not touching, close enough that Colton could feel the warmth radiating from his coat. The dog's breathing was slow. His eyes were half closed, but not shut. Settled, not sleeping, just present. Colton looked at the stars through the pine branches. He didn't think about Silas. He didn't think about the list, or the switchback, or the reporter who wouldn't call back. He just sat and breathed, and let the cold fill his lungs, and let the silence be silence for a few minutes. The stars were very bright. The trees were very still. Somewhere far down in the valley, an owl called once. Then nothing. We keep going. Odin's ear twitched. That was all, but it was enough. Colton went inside, fed the dog, locked the door, slept 4 hours, the best he'd managed in a week. The chainsaw woke them both at 2 in the morning. Odin was on his feet before Colton's eyes were open. The dog stood rigid in the dark cabin, ears locked northeast, toward the barn, toward the logging road. A low sound started deep in his chest. The noise cut through the walls, high-pitched, industrial. Not the steady hum of someone cutting firewood. Short bursts, 3 seconds on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off. Rhythmic, deliberate. The kind of sound designed to keep someone awake, to let someone know they were being watched. Colton rolled out of bed, didn't turn on a light. He pulled on boots and a jacket and moved to the window. Kept his body to the side of the frame. Old habit. Don't silhouette yourself. Headlights. 2 sets. Parked on the logging road about 200 yards from the cabin. The chainsaw sound came from somewhere between the lights and the tree line. Then it stopped. Silence. 5 seconds. Then it started again. The engine revving higher this time. Closer. Bleib. Odin didn't move from his position, but the sound in his chest deepened. Not a growl, something beyond growling. Something that said he was recording every sound and calculating distance and waiting for a command that hadn't come yet. Colton watched from the window for 10 minutes. The headlights sat there. The chainsaw ran in bursts. Then both trucks moved. Slow. Down the logging road toward the county route. Taillights disappearing through the trees like red eyes blinking out. He waited another 20 minutes. Then he went outside. Odin went with him. Colton didn't try to stop him this time. The flashlight showed what he expected. The fence section he'd repaired last week was cut clean through. Wire snipped in 4 places. Professional cuts. Bolt cutters. And nailed to the barn door a piece of paper. Lined notebook paper torn from a spiral binding. Block letters. Blue ink. This land has a history you don't want. Colton pulled the note off the nail, held it under the flashlight beam. Blue ink, block letters, careful printing. He went inside, got the original name list from the metal box, and laid them side by side on the kitchen table under the overhead bulb. Same hand. Same pen pressure, same block style, same slight leftward lean on the vertical strokes. Silas wrote the list. Silas wrote the note. Or the same person wrote both. And the only person whose name was on that list and who had reason to send a warning was Silas Redmond. So he's not hiding. He's advertising. Odin circled the cabin perimeter, fast this time, not the measured 11-minute route. Quick, agitated sweeps, nose down, covering ground. He came back and sat at Colton's feet, stared at the road. His jaw was tight. His body hadn't relaxed since the chainsaw. In the morning, Colton called the sheriff's department. Deputy Keene answered. "I'd like to report vandalism and trespassing. Someone cut my fence and left a threatening note on my barn door last night. 2 vehicles on the logging road at 2 a.m. "What kind of threatening note?" "I'll read it to you. This land has a history you don't want." "Could be kids." "It's not kids, Deputy, and you know that." Silence on the line. Then, "We'll look into it." "When?" "When we get to it, Mr. Shea. We're a small department." The line went dead. Colton set the phone on the table, looked at Odin. "That went about how I expected." The dog's eyes tracked the road. Then Colton. Then the road again. No help was coming from inside the system. The deputy was either owned or too afraid to act. The sheriff's office wasn't going to investigate a complaint against the man who kept half the county employed. Colton was on his own. He picked up the note, read it one more time, set it in the lockbox with the other evidence. Then he poured coffee, fed the dog, put on his work boots. He had fences to repair. Again. Colton found Delilah at the courthouse at 9. She looked up when he came in and stopped writing before he said a word. Something happened. Chainsaw at 2 a.m. Cut the fence. Note on the barn door. Same handwriting as the list. She set her pen down. "How bad?" "Property damage. No confrontation. They came and went while I watched from the window." "You didn't go out?" "2 trucks, at least 3 men, armed probably. I had a flashlight and a dog." He sat in the chair across from her desk. "I don't engage on their terms. I choose my own ground." She studied him. Something crossed her expression that might have been respect. "Deputy Keene took my report this morning. He said they'd look into it." "He won't." "I know. Keene and Silas grew up together. You told me." "It's worse than that. Keene owes Silas money. Gambling debt. Regular poker game at the lodge. Keene's bad at cards, and Silas keeps the tab running. It's how Silas operates. He doesn't threaten people directly. He gives them things. Favors. Loans. Patience. And then he holds the balance." "I need to talk to Keene, directly, face to face." "He won't help you." "Maybe not, but he needs to know what he's covering for." "He needs to hear the word murder and decide how it sits with him." Delilah looked at him for a long time. Her jaw worked. Then she nodded. "He eats lunch at the diner every day. 12:30. Same booth. I'll be there at 12:30. He stood, walked to the door, stopped. "Delilah." "What?" "Have you slept?" She held his gaze. "Have you?" He didn't answer. Neither did she. He left. The diner was 8 booths, a counter, and a kitchen that smelled like grease and burnt coffee. Colton arrived at 12:15, ordered coffee, took the booth nearest the door. At 12:30, the cruiser pulled into the lot. Keene walked in. Same sunglasses, same clenched jaw. He saw Colton immediately. His step faltered. One beat. Then he kept walking to his usual booth at the back. Colton picked up his coffee and moved, slid into the seat across from the deputy, set the mug on the table. Keene's hand stopped halfway to the menu. "I didn't invite you to sit down." "I know." Colton put both hands flat on the table, open, visible. "I'm going to talk for about 2 minutes. Then you can decide what to do with what I say." Keene's jaw moved, but he didn't get up. He didn't call for the waitress. He sat still. "I know about the timber being cut on federal land above my property. I know Ridgeline is harvesting old-growth Douglas fir without permits and moving it through my land on a road covered by extraction rights Silas kept in the deed." Keene's face didn't change. "I know about Hank Graves. I know the GPS coordinates on the list that was buried in my barn floor match the exact location where Hank died. I know the tree that fell on him was cut at an angle that doesn't match an accidental fell. And I know Hank called a reporter the night before he died to report what he'd found." Now Keene's face changed, just slightly. A tightening around the eyes. "I've sent everything I have to the U.S. Forest Service in Bend. Federal land, federal timber, federal jurisdiction. Whatever arrangement you have with Silas, whatever he holds over you, it's about to become a federal matter. And when it does, the people who ask you questions won't be from this county. They'll be from Portland, and they won't care about your poker debts." Keene sat very still. His right hand, the one near his sidearm, was shaking, just slightly. The left was flat on the table, not moving. "You can help me now, or you can explain later why you didn't." Keene picked up his hat from the seat beside him, put it on, stood up. "I don't know what you're talking about." He walked out, didn't look back, didn't pay for the food he hadn't ordered. The cruiser pulled out of the lot and turned south. Colton sat in the booth. The waitress came over. He ordered another coffee, drank it slowly, watched the parking lot through the window. Keene's hand had been shaking. The right one, the one that mattered. That meant the words had landed somewhere. Whether they'd landed deep enough to change anything was a different question. He paid, walked outside into the cold. In the parking lot, Delilah was standing next to his truck. She'd walked from the courthouse, 2 blocks, hands in her jacket pockets, hair damp from the mist. "Well?" He didn't say yes. "What did he say?" "He said he didn't know what I was talking about. Then he left." "That's not a no." "No, it's not." They stood next to the truck. Odin sat in the bed, watching them with his head tilted slightly to one side. The air was cold, gray sky pressing low on the tree line. Delilah had her county map rolled under one arm. "I want to show you one more thing." She unrolled the map on the truck hood, pinned one corner with her coffee thermos, leaned over it. Colton came around to the other side and leaned in. "This is where the lumber goes after it leaves your property." Her finger traced a line east on the map. "A specialty sawmill 3 counties over, cash operation. They buy old-growth timber without chain of custody documentation. I found the name buried in a payment record Silas filed with the county 2 years ago as consulting income. But the dollar amount matched a wholesale rate for raw Douglas fir at current boardfoot prices. Her finger traced the route. From the federal land, down the ridge, through Colton's property, County Road East, to the mill. Their hands were close on the map. Colton could see her fingers near his on the paper. She could see his near hers. The space between them was small. Neither of them moved for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then Delilah rolled up the map. I made copies of everything. The mill records, the payment filings, the lease histories. They're in my car. Bring them to the property. We'll keep them in the cabin with the rest. She nodded, looked at Odin in the truck bed. The dog looked back at her. His head was still tilted. Tomorrow. She walked back toward the courthouse. Colton watched her go. Odin watched her go. Then Odin looked at Colton with an expression that, on a human face, would have been very specific. Don't start. He drove home. The sky was darkening early. November. Days shorter every week. He had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. He spent them fixing the fence. For the second time. They came again that night, and the night after that. The first night was headlights, 2 trucks on the logging road at 1 a.m. No chainsaw, just high beams pointed at the cabin. Steady, unblinking, for 20 minutes. Then they left. Odin stood at the window the entire time, body rigid, not growling, past growling. His nails dug into the cabin floor and didn't move. The second night was different. Colton woke to an engine idling close. Very close. He looked out. 1 truck. End of the driveway. Someone got out, walked to the barn, tried the door. Locked. Colton had started locking everything after the first night. The figure walked around the barn, checked the windows, stood at the northeast corner for a full minute. The corner where Odin had dug. Then walked back to the truck, drove away. Colton didn't go outside either night. He assessed, counted vehicles, counted personnel, timed arrivals and departures, noted headlight spacing, which told him the make and model. He logged everything in a notebook with the same discipline he'd used for intelligence collection in contested terrain. He didn't engage, not because he was afraid, because he was outnumbered and operating alone, and 20 years of unconventional warfare had beaten one rule into him until it was permanent. You don't fight on the enemy's schedule. You choose your own ground, your own timing, your own terms. He was building a picture. Silas had 2 trucks, at least 3 men, including Dale and Marcus. The deputy provided legal cover. The logging road provided physical access. And the escalation pattern said something important. Silas was getting nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. You just had to be patient enough to let them. But patience had a cost. The retreat wasn't getting built. The fence repairs sat half-finished. The clearing he'd been grading was growing over with new ferns. Every night watching the road was a night not spent building the thing he'd come here to build. the thing that mattered. And Odin was wearing down. The dog didn't sleep the way he used to. He stood at windows, circled the cabin at odd hours. He ate his food, but without the usual efficiency. 90 seconds had become 2 minutes, then 3. He was running on vigilance alone, and vigilance without rest burned a dog out the same way it burned a soldier. "Easy, buddy." Colton said it at 4 a.m. when Odin stood at the door for the 3rd consecutive morning. "Nobody's out there right now." Odin looked at him, then at the door, then back. Colton let him out, watched him circle the perimeter in the dark. Counted 11 minutes. Odin came back, lay down by the stove, closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, but his ears stayed up. He wasn't sleeping. He was listening while pretending to sleep. Colton knew that trick. He did it himself most nights. On the 3rd day, Delilah brought the copies. She also brought names. Dale Furlow and Marcus Ott. They're the 2 men in the trucks. "You're sure?" "Dale drives a lifted Chevy with a cracked right taillight. Marcus drives a Ford flatbed with a Ridgeline timber decal on the door. Both are listed on Ridgeline's payroll. Both have been with Silas over a decade." She set the envelope of document copies on the cabin table. Odin lay near the stove. He watched Delilah, but didn't get up. His energy was lower than Colton liked. "There's more. I found the mill. Called them. Told them I was a Ridgeline bookkeeper verifying invoices. They confirmed 3 deliveries in the last 4 months. All old-growth Douglas fir. All paid in cash. No chain of custody paperwork. That's the chain. Federal land to my property to the mill. Harvest, transport, sale. We've got all of it documented except the connection to Hank. We've got Hank, too. We just can't prove the tree was aimed without a forensic analysis of that stump. And nobody with authority to order that analysis is going to touch it while the county sheriff is looking the other way. Then we go over the county. The Forest Service packet I mailed has everything. Federal land, federal timber, federal jurisdiction. When they open the case, the forensic work happens automatically. That could take months. I know. We might not have months, Colton. I know that too. He tapped the table once. Silas is escalating. He's not sending his guys to scare me anymore. He's probing, testing my response time, checking whether I call the sheriff, whether I come outside, whether I have a weapon. He's gathering intelligence. The next step after intelligence gathering isn't more gathering. It's action. Delilah looked at the envelope on the table, at 3 years of unanswered questions finally assembling into something that looked like proof. Then we need to be ready before he is. We will. She left it dark. Colton locked up, fed Odin, made copies of the copies, kept one set in the cabin, one in his truck's toolbox. Mailed one to Delilah's sister in Eugene in a sealed FedEx envelope with no return address. Insurance. Then he sat at the table and did what he'd been trained to do. He studied the terrain. The logging road had one way in from the county route and one way out. A natural choke point a quarter mile above the property where the road narrowed between 2 rock outcrops. Any vehicle coming in had to pass through that gap. He sketched it in the notebook, drew lines, calculated distances, noted the sight lines from the ridge above, because Silas was going to come. Colton could feel it, the way you feel a storm building before the sky changes, pressure dropping, Air going still, everything waiting. Something was coming, and when it did, Colton needed to be standing on ground he'd chosen. It came on a Tuesday. Colton had driven to the county seat to mail a duplicate of the Forest Service packet to the Oregon Department of Forestry. Second agency, second paper trail. The drive took 3 hours round trip. He left Odin at the property. He didn't want to, but the cabin was locked. The barn was locked, and Odin was 82 pounds of trained attention, who didn't let strangers pass the porch without permission from the only person whose permission mattered. He was 2 miles from home when he saw the smoke. Thin at first, a gray smear above the tree line, then thicker, darker, rising from behind the ridge where the barn sat. Not chimney smoke, not wood stove smoke, structure smoke. Oily, black, moving fast. He floored the truck. The driveway was empty when he arrived. No vehicles, but the barn was on fire. The flames had started at the back wall. The new cedar boards he'd installed were dry enough to catch fast, and once the frame caught, it went. Fire climbed the trusses he'd rebuilt by hand. It ate through the roof tin, buckling it, the workbench, the tools, the survey map Delilah had pinned to the wall, all feeding the fire. Colton ran to the barn entrance. The heat pushed him back at 10 feet. He circled to the side ventilation gap he'd left in the framing, reached through, found the lockbox bolted to the floor beam. The bolts held. He grabbed the shovel leaning against the outside wall, pried the box free, and dragged it out through the gap. Metal hot under his hands. Inside the box, the original metal box from the ground. The list, the coordinates, the cache, the note from the barn door, the handwriting samples. The copies were in the cabin. The duplicates were in the truck toolbox. The FedEx package was in Eugene. Evidence saved. Barn lost. He stood in the driveway with the lockbox at his feet and watched his barn burn. The barn he'd rebuilt over 7 weeks. The trusses he'd measured and cut. The tin roof he'd laid in the rain. The floor where Odin had dug up a dead man's secret. 7 weeks of work. Gone in 7 minutes. Then he looked around. The clearing was empty. The cabin was intact. The truck was where he'd parked it. But the property was too quiet. Odin. The word came out wrong, too fast, too high. He checked the cabin, locked. He opened it, empty. The clearing, empty. The fence line, nothing. He called, he whistled, he gave the German command, the one Odin never ignored. "Here! Odin, here!" Nothing. No bark, no whine, no crash of brush. Nothing. He ran the perimeter. 11 minutes, the same route Odin ran every morning of his life. No dog, no sound, no movement. He came back to the logging road, looked down. Tire tracks, fresh, in the mud. 2 vehicles. One set of tracks going north, deeper on the way in. The other set going south, deeper, going out. Heavier, carrying something. And between the 2 sets of tire tracks, in the soft mud at the edge of the road, paw prints. Deep, smeared, dragged to one side, like a dog had been pulled by something around its neck while it fought to stay on the ground. Colton stood in the mud next to the paw prints. The barn crackled and roared behind him. Smoke rose above the tree line in a column that could probably be seen from town. His dog was in someone's truck, taken while he was gone, while the fire pulled attention and covered sound. A diversion. Textbook. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. For the first time in 20 years, Colton Shea's hands were shaking. He sat down, right there in the mud, next to the paw prints and the tire tracks, with the sound of his barn dying behind him. He put his hands on his knees and tried to breathe. 30 seconds. The whiteboard. The FOB. 12 names. One of them crossed out with a red marker the day after the ambush. I make bad calls. People I care about pay for them. He'd left the property. He'd left the dog alone. He'd driven to town to mail paperwork that would take weeks to produce results, while 2 men with trucks and a deputy on their side drove up his road and took the only living thing in the world that trusted him completely. The fire burned behind him. The smoke rose. The cabin stood. The evidence was safe. Every piece of paper was accounted for. Every copy in its place. The dog was gone. Colton sat in the mud with his hands open on his knees, palms up. Empty. The same posture he'd held on a dirt road in Nuristan 8 years ago, while a helicopter landed and 2 medics ran past him toward a body he couldn't look at. He didn't move. He didn't call anyone. He didn't plan. For the first time since he'd bought this land and started building something that mattered, Colton Shea had nothing in his hands and no idea what to do with them. Delilah found him at dawn. She'd seen the smoke from the county road, black column rising above the tree line, visible for miles. She'd driven fast. The sedan fishtailed on the gravel driveway and stopped 10 feet from where Colton sat in the mud. He hadn't moved. His hands were still on his knees. His boots were sunk 2 inches into the ground. The barn behind him had burned down to its frame. Charred beams, twisted tin. The wood stove inside the workshop had cracked from the heat and lay on its side in the ash like a broken tooth. Delilah got out of the car and walked to him. She didn't run. She didn't crouch down. She stood in front of him and looked at the barn, then at the empty property, then at him. "Where's Odin?" Colton didn't answer. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the paw prints in the mud. "Colton, where is the dog?" "They took him." She looked at the tire tracks, at the paw prints, at the drag marks in the soft ground where an 82-pound dog had fought against whatever held him. She stood there for a long moment. Then she did something Colton didn't expect. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't offer comfort or perspective or any of the things people say when something terrible has happened and they don't know what else to do. "They took your dog." 3 words. Flat. Direct. Not a question. A fact. Already pointed at the next thing before the last one had time to settle. Colton's hands stopped shaking. He looked up at her. She was standing with her arms at her sides, rain jacket, mud on her boots. Her face was set the same way it had been at the switchback, the same way it had been in her office the first time he said Hank's name. Controlled, hard, ready. He stood. His knees were stiff. His back ached from sitting on cold ground for hours. The shrapnel scar pulled across his shoulder. I spent 3 years building this. I know. I'm not walking away. I know that too. He looked at the barn, at the charred remains of 7 weeks of work, at the property he'd bought with everything he had. Then he looked at the logging road, at the tracks going north. Something shifted inside him. Not anger, colder than anger, clearer. The same shift he'd felt 100 times before, on different ground, in different mountains, when the situation went bad and the options narrowed, and the only thing left was the thing you'd been trained to do. Assess, plan, execute. They used Dale and Marcus. One truck went north up the logging road to grab Odin. The other set the fire as a diversion, while I was in town. They knew my schedule. How? Keen. He's been watching the property. He knows when I leave and when I come back. Delilah's jaw tightened. Dale's truck is a lifted Chevy. Marcus drives the Ford flatbed. If they've got Odin, they've got him somewhere on Silas's property or the Ridgeline Yard, 12 miles downriver. You're not going to drive down there and knock on the door. No, I'm not. He walked to the cabin, opened the door, went to the table where the notebook sat with his terrain sketches. He flipped to the page with the logging road drawn on it, the choke point between the rock outcrops, the sight lines from the ridge above. They'll come back. They have to. The logging road through my property is their only route to the federal land. If they've escalated to arson, it means Silas is running out of options. He needs this corridor open, and he needs me gone. And when the fire and the dog don't make me leave, he'll send Dale and Marcus again. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. And you'll be waiting. I'll be waiting. On my ground. On my terms. Delilah looked at the notebook, at the sketch, at the lines Colton had drawn with the precision of someone who'd planned ambushes for a living. What do you need from me? Call the U.S. Forest Service office in Bend. Tell them what happened. The arson. The dog. The escalation. Tell them we need a federal response, and we need it this week. Use Hank's name. Use the coordinates. Use everything. She nodded. And there's a man named Jesse Weaver. He left me a voicemail 2 days ago about the retreat program. Marine. Purple Heart. Leg brace. He's driving up from Medford this weekend to be the first guest. You want me to call him? I want him here tonight, if he's willing. Delilah picked up her phone. She didn't ask why. She understood. Colton needed someone at his back. Not because he couldn't do this alone. Because alone was what Silas expected. She made the calls from the cabin porch. Colton went to work. He spent the afternoon on the logging road above the property. He walked the choke point 3 times, measured distances, identified cover positions. Then he started building. He felled 2 medium-sized cedars across the narrowest section of the road, not enough to look deliberate from a distance, enough to stop a truck. He ran wire across the road surface at ankle height, connected to a marine flare he'd had in his truck's emergency kit. Tripwire. The flare would light up the gap when someone hit it. He positioned himself on the ridge above, behind a rock outcrop with clear sightlines to the road in both directions. 20 years of unconventional warfare. Setting up tactical positions in terrain he'd never seen before and making them work in hours. Different country, different war, same work. He didn't bring a weapon. He had his sidearm in the cabin safe, but he left it there. This wasn't Afghanistan. These weren't combatants. If he fired a shot, the law that hadn't helped him would turn against him fast. He needed to control the situation without escalating it past the point of no return. Jesse Weaver arrived at 4 p.m. Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant, retired. He drove a pickup with a Camp Lejeune sticker on the bumper and got out with a leg brace on his left knee and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "You're Shay." "I'm Shay." "Delilah Graves called me, said you needed help tonight, said there's a dog involved." Jesse looked at the burned barn, at the property, at the terrain. "I was coming this weekend anyway, figured I'd come early." "You understand what's happening here. Lady on the phone told me a man is stealing federal timber, killed her husband, burned your barn, and took your dog. That about cover it?" "That covers it." Jesse nodded, looked at the ridge, at the logging road, at the felled trees blocking the gap. "I've seen worse setups. Where do you want me?" "South side of the choke point. Eyes on the county road approach. If anyone comes in, I need to know how many vehicles and how many people." "Radio?" "I've got a pair. Channel 6. Jesse took the radio, tested it, looked at Colton with the kind of assessment one combat veteran gives another. Whatever he saw was enough. "I'll be in position by dark." He limped up the road without another word. His brace clicked with each step. His pace didn't slow. Colton watched him go. Then he went back to the cabin, fed himself, drank coffee, put on dark clothes, loaded a headlamp and the second radio and a pair of wire cutters into his jacket pockets, left the sidearm in the safe. He looked at the empty spot by the stove where Odin slept every night. The stick was still there, right where the dog had left it. "I'm coming, buddy." He locked the cabin, walked up the logging road in the last light, took his position on the ridge, and waited. They came at 11. Jesse's voice on the radio, low, calm. The voice of a man who'd done this before, in places that mattered more. 2 vehicles, county road, heading north on the logging road. Chevy first, flatbed behind, loaded. Something in the flatbed. Could be a cage. Colton's chest tightened. A cage. "Copy. Let them pass your position. Don't move." "Roger." He watched from the ridge as the headlights appeared below. 2 trucks, moving slow. The Chevy's cracked taillight was visible even from 200 yards. Dale. The Ford flatbed behind it. Marcus. And on the flatbed, visible in the headlight wash from the trailing truck, a metal crate. Dog-sized. Colton's breathing slowed. His heart rate dropped. Not because he willed it, because the training took over. The same way it had taken over 100 times before in places where the stakes were measured in lives. The body knew what to do when the mind got quiet enough to let it. The Chevy hit the felled trees first. Brake lights. The truck stopped. Dale got out. Flashlight. He walked to the blockage, kicked one of the logs, looked up the road. "The hell's this?" Marcus pulled up behind him, got out, both of them standing in the gap. Both of them looking at the logs. The flare tripped. White light exploded in the gap. Both men stumbled back. Dale dropped his flashlight. Marcus grabbed the side of his truck. The flare burned hot and bright, turning the narrow road into a lit stage with two disoriented actors who hadn't expected an audience. Colton stepped out of the tree line above them, positioned on the ridge, 20 feet of elevation, clear sight line. Both men below him in the light. "Put the dog down and walk away." Dale spun toward the voice. His hand went to his belt. "Don't!" Colton's voice carried through the gap with a clarity that had nothing to do with volume. It was authority. 20 years of commanding men in situations where the wrong word got people killed. "Your hand moves another inch, and the federal agents who are already on their way will add assault charges to the timber theft and the arson." Dale's hand stopped. Marcus hadn't moved. He stood by his truck, eyes adjusting to the flare light, looking up at the ridge. He was the smarter one. He was calculating. The U.S. Forest Service has everything: the coordinates, the stumps, the mill receipts, the extraction rights fraud. It's done. The only question is whether you walk out of here on your own or in the back of a federal vehicle. Silence. The flare crackled. The light made their faces stark. Dale looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the road behind them. One way in, one way out, and both directions were accounted for. "The cage. Open it." Marcus moved first. He walked to the flatbed, slow, hands visible. He reached the metal crate and unlatched the door. Odin came out. Fast. Not panicked. Fast. He hit the ground, shook once, and ran straight up the slope toward Colton without a sound. 82 pounds of dark fur and muscle moving through the trees in the flare light. He reached Colton in 8 seconds and sat at his left side, his usual position. His only position. Colton didn't look down. He kept his eyes on the two men below, but his hand dropped to the dog's head, briefly, then back. "Good boy." Odin's tail moved once, then he went still, watching the men, ready. The sound of a third engine came from the south, slower, heavier. A truck Colton hadn't seen before. It pulled up behind Marcus's flatbed and stopped. The door opened. Silas Redmond stepped out. He looked at the felled trees, the flare, his two men standing in the light with their hands at their sides. Then he looked up at the ridge. "You've been busy, Shay. Busier than you know." Silas walked forward, past Marcus, past Dale, into the lit gap between the logs. He stood there in his clean boots and his tan jacket and looked up at Colton and the dog on the ridge above him, the way a man looks at a problem he hasn't figured out yet. This doesn't have to go where you're taking it. It went there the day you killed Hank Graves. Something changed in Silas's face. Not surprise. He was past surprise. More like the moment when a man who's been controlling a conversation for years realizes he's not controlling this one. That was an accident. The cut angle says otherwise. The coordinates your employee buried say otherwise. And the federal referral I filed last week says otherwise. A fourth vehicle, this one from the north, headlights bouncing on the logging road, then pulling up behind Colton's position. A county cruiser, Deputy Keene. Keene got out, walked down the slope toward the gap. He looked at Silas, at Dale and Marcus, at the cage on the flatbed, at the burning flare. at Colton on the ridge with the dog at his side. His right hand was shaking again. The left was still. "Deputy." Silas's voice was smooth, practiced. "This man is trespassing on a logging road covered by extraction rights. I need you to remove him." Keene looked at Silas, then at Colton. "The extraction rights are on his property, Silas. This road is on his land. He's not trespassing. You are." The air changed. Silas's expression didn't shift, but his body did. A small rearrangement of weight. Colton had seen that movement before. In villages. In rooms where the wrong read got people killed. Silas was recalculating. "Think carefully, Keene." "I have been." Keene's voice was tight, strained, but the shaking in his right hand had stopped. Both hands were still now. "I've been thinking about it for 3 years, since Hank." Keene pulled the cuffs from his belt. Dale took a step backward. Marcus didn't move. "Silas Redmond, turn around." From the south, more lights. 2 vehicles, federal plates. The U.S. Forest Service. Delilah had made the call. Jesse had confirmed their approach on the radio. They'd been waiting at the county road junction for Keene's arrival. 2 agents got out. Body armor, flashlights, badges. "U.S. Forest Service, federal investigation. Everyone stay where you are." The flare was dying. The light softened. Shadows stretched back across the road and into the trees. Silas Redmond stood in the gap between 2 felled logs with a deputy behind him and federal agents in front of him, and 3 years of crime unraveling in the mud at his feet. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He looked up at Colton one more time. Colton looked back. Odin sat at his side, tail straight, alert. Rain was starting again. Light drops, landing on the dog's coat and rolling off. "You sold me the wrong piece of land, Silas." Silas didn't respond. Keene put the cuffs on. The agents moved in. Dale and Marcus were separated and walked to the federal vehicles without resistance. The Chevy and the flatbed would be impounded. The cage on the flatbed photographed and tagged as evidence. Colton came down from the ridge. Odin stayed with him. The dog's body was calm now, not rigid, not agitated. Calm in the way he got when the threat had passed and the perimeter was secure. Jesse limped up from his position on the south side. "Hell of a show. Thanks for being here. That's what Marines are for." Jesse looked at Odin. "Dog all right?" Colton crouched, ran his hands over Odin's body, checked his legs, his ribs, his ears. No injuries, no blood. The dog was dirty, and his coat was matted where the cage wire had pressed against it. But he was whole, intact, alive. "He's all right." Odin licked Colton's wrist once. Then he stood and walked to the truck, jumped in the bed, lay down, closed his eyes. 82 pounds of dog who'd spent a day in a cage on the back of a flatbed truck. And the first thing he did when it was over was go to his spot and rest. Colton watched him for a moment. Then he turned back to the road. The federal agents were loading Silas into the back of their vehicle. Keene stood by his cruiser. His hands were in his pockets. His face looked like it had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Delilah's sedan came up the road. She'd been waiting at the junction with the Forest Service vehicles. She parked and got out and walked straight to Colton. She didn't say anything. She looked at the dog sleeping in the truck bed. Then she looked at Colton. Then she nodded once, small, firm. He nodded back. That was enough. Morning came cold and clear. Colton stood in the driveway at first light. The barn was gone. Just the frame remained. Charred posts, twisted metal, ash. It looked like something from a war zone. It looked like a lot of places he'd been. He picked up a hammer, walked to the fence, started pulling out the cut wire from where Dale had snipped it. Then he began restringing, post by post, one section at a time. Odin lay in the clearing, watching. His body was loose. His breathing was even. He'd slept through the night for the first time in a week. All 11 minutes of his morning perimeter check had been calm. No pausing, no agitation, just the usual route, clockwise, same speed, same focus. Jesse came out of the cabin at 7. He'd slept on the floor in a sleeping bag he'd brought in his truck. He didn't say good morning. He picked up a pair of work gloves from the porch, walked to the barn frame, and started pulling debris. They worked in silence for 2 hours. Colton on the fence, Jesse on the barn. Neither of them spoke, because neither of them needed to. The work was the conversation. At 9, a truck pulled up the driveway, then another, then a sedan. 3 vehicles, Oregon plates. The first truck had a sticker on the bumper that said 22 a day. The sedan had a Purple Heart license plate frame. 3 men got out, 2 from the trucks, 1 from the sedan. They were different ages, different builds, different branches. Army, Navy, Marine. Colton could tell by how they stood, by how they scanned the property before they spoke, by how they looked at the burned barn and didn't flinch. Jesse walked over, shook each man's hand. "You're early." "Delilah called us," the oldest one said. 50s, gray beard, ball cap with an anchor on it. Navy. Said the retreat was open. Said the owner could use some hands. Colton stood by the fence with the hammer in his hand. He watched 3 strangers walk onto his property and look at him with the kind of recognition that didn't require a handshake or a story or a service record. They saw the barn. They saw the dog. They saw the man with the hammer. And they understood. "Welcome." The Navy man nodded. "Where do you want us?" Colton pointed to the barn frame. "Debris first, then we measure for new trusses." They went to work. No questions, no speeches. 4 veterans and a dog in a clearing in Oregon, pulling charred wood and straightening nails, and doing the only thing any of them had ever known how to do when something broke. They rebuilt it. Delilah came at noon. She brought paperwork. The timber extraction rights clause had been flagged by the federal investigation. When Silas's case went to trial, the rights would revert to the property owner under the state forfeiture statute. The logging road would belong to Colton. Fully. No loopholes. She set the papers on the cabin table. Colton looked at them, looked at her. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank your dog. He's the one who started digging." They stood in the cabin, close. The space between them was small. Colton looked at her hands, She looked at his. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. The nod between them was enough. It said everything it needed to say. Not now. Not yet. But not never. She left. He went back to work. By evening, the debris was cleared. The barn frame stood bare against the sky. Tomorrow, they'd start measuring. The day after, cutting. The week after, raising new walls. Colton sat on the cabin porch. Odin lay beside him. The dog's head was up. His ears tracked the sounds of the valley below. Trucks on the county road. A woodpecker in the cedars. Wind moving through the canopy. Jesse sat on the other end of the porch. The 3 veterans had set up tents in the clearing. One of them was building a fire in the pit Colton had dug last month. The others were sitting around it, talking in low voices about nothing in particular. The way soldiers talk when the day is done and the dark is coming, and there's nowhere else they need to be. Not bad for a first week. Colton looked at Jesse. The retreat opens officially in January. You're 3 months early. Jesse shrugged. We were in the neighborhood. All of you. Delilah's convincing. Colton watched the fire in the clearing. 4 men and a dog, and a burned barn, and a patch of Oregon mountainside that had been through more in the last 2 weeks than most properties see in a century. And somehow, standing in the middle of all of it, something was still growing. Yeah. He looked at the clearing, at the tents, at the men who'd shown up because a woman they'd never met called them and said a man who'd never met them needed help. She is. Early morning, the last chapter. Colton woke before the light. He dressed in the dark, laced his boots by feel, opened the cabin door. Odin was already on the porch, standing, ears forward, ready. Let's go. They walked up the trail behind the cabin, the same trail Colton had hiked a dozen times since he'd moved here. Up through the Douglas fir, past the old stumps where Silas's crew had cut, past the switchback where Hank Graves had died. Higher, above the tree line, to the ridge where the Cascades opened up and you could see the valley and the river and the town of Pine Haven below, still dark, still sleeping. Jesse was behind them, then the 3 veterans. Nobody spoke. Boots on gravel and pine needles. Breath in cold air. The sound of 5 men and a dog climbing a mountain before sunrise. They reached the top as the light came. Not sunrise yet, the moment before, when the sky turns from black to gray, to the faintest blue, and the mountains appear in layers, one behind the other, stretching east toward a horizon you can't reach. They stood on the ridge, 5 veterans and a German shepherd, looking at a valley that had tried to swallow them all in different ways and hadn't managed it. Nobody said anything for a long time. That was fine. Silence was the point. Silence was what they'd come for. The kind of silence you can only find when you're standing on high ground, with people who don't need you to explain what you're carrying, because they're carrying it too. Odin sat at Colton's left side, his usual spot. His coat was damp from the climb. His breathing was even. He watched the valley with the same steady attention he gave everything. Patient, present, unimpressed by the view, but fully committed to the moment. Colton looked at the sky, at the mountains, at the fog beginning to lift from the valley floor, like a curtain being drawn. This is enough church for me. Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. The Navy man closed his eyes. Jesse shifted his weight off his bad leg and leaned on a boulder. One of the Army guys sat down on a rock and put his hands on his knees and just breathed. Odin stood up, shook his coat once. Then he started down the trail. Not fast, steady. He got about 20 yards ahead, stopped, and looked back at Colton, ears up, tail level, waiting, leading. Yeah. Colton stepped off the ridge. I'm coming. He followed the dog down the trail. Behind him, the others started walking, one by one, back down the mountain, toward the property, toward the work that was waiting, toward a thing they were building together out of charred wood and new nails and a stubbornness that didn't quit because it had never learned how. Odin stayed ahead, 20 yards, looking back every few steps to make sure Colton was still there, then turning forward again, moving through the trees toward the light that was breaking through the canopy now, gold and clean, falling across the trail in long, bright bars. The dog kept walking. Colton kept following. Behind them, the sun came up over the Cascades, and the day began. Delilah found him at dawn. She'd seen the smoke from the county road, black column rising above the tree line, visible for miles in the clear November air. She'd driven fast. The sedan fishtailed twice on the gravel driveway and stopped 10 feet from where Colton sat in the mud. He hadn't moved. His hands were on his knees, palms up, open. His boots had sunk 2 inches into the soft ground. The barn behind him had burned down to its frame. Charred beams stood against the morning sky like the ribs of something dead. Twisted tin roofing lay in the ash. The wood stove from the workshop had cracked from the heat and tipped on its side. The workbench was gone. The tool rack was gone. 7 weeks of work reduced to charcoal and steam. Delilah got out of the car. She didn't run. She didn't call his name. She walked across the clearing, stepped around the debris, and stood in front of him. She looked at the barn, at the empty property, at him. "Where's Odin?" Colton didn't answer. His jaw was locked. His eyes were fixed on the paw prints in the mud beside him. Drag marks, smeared, deep where the claws had dug in. "Colton, where is the dog?" "They took him." She looked at the tire tracks, at the paw prints, at the drag marks where 82 pounds of German Shepherd had fought against whatever held him. She took it in, all of it. 30 seconds. Then she did something he didn't expect. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't offer any of the words people reach for when something terrible has happened and they don't know what else to do. "They took your dog." 3 words, flat, direct, already pointed at the next thing. Colton's hands stopped shaking. He looked up at her. Rain jacket, mud on her boots. Her face was set the same way it had been at the switchback. Controlled, hard, ready. He stood. His knees were stiff. His back ached. The shrapnel scar pulled across his shoulder. I spent 3 years building this. I know. I'm not walking away. I know that, too. He looked at the charred barn, then at the logging road, at the tracks heading north. Something shifted in his chest. Not anger. Colder. Clearer. He'd felt it 100 times before, in different mountains, when the situation went bad and the options narrowed, and the only thing left was the thing you'd been trained to do. Assess. Plan. Execute. They used Dale and Marcus, 2 vehicles. One took Odin while I was in town. The other set the fire as cover. They knew my schedule. How? Keen. He's been logging my movements from the road. Delilah's jaw tightened. Dale's Chevy, Marcus's flatbed. If they have Odin, he's at Silas's property or the Ridgeline Yard, 12 miles downriver. You're not driving down there. No. He walked to the cabin, opened the notebook on the table, the terrain sketch. The choke point between the rock outcrops a 1/4 mile above the property, the sightlines from the ridge. They'll come back. The logging road through my property is their only route to the federal timber. Silas has escalated to arson. That means he's running out of patience. He needs this corridor open and me gone. When the fire and the missing dog don't make me leave, he'll send Dale and Marcus again. Tonight. Tomorrow. They have to come back. And you'll be waiting. On my ground. On my terms. Delilah looked at the notebook, at the lines drawn with military precision. What do you need? Call the Forest Service in Bend. Not a report, a request. Tell them we have evidence of federal timber theft, arson, and a potential homicide. Tell them we need agents tonight. Use everything. Hank's name, the coordinates, the mill receipts. She nodded. Second thing, there's a man named Jesse Weaver, Marine, gunnery sergeant, retired. He left me a voicemail about the retreat program. He's in Medford. You want him here tonight? If he's willing. Delilah picked up her phone. She made the Forest Service call from the porch. Colton heard her voice through the wall. Calm, specific, dates, names, coordinates, dollar amounts from memory. She'd been living with this information for weeks. The call to Jesse was shorter. Colton heard her say, "A man needs help tonight. A dog is involved. Can you come?" Silence. Then, "Thank you." She came back inside. Forest Service sends 2 agents from Bend, 4-hour drive. They'll be at the county road junction by 9 tonight. Jesse Weaver is leaving Medford now. Here by 4. Colton spent the afternoon on the logging road. He walked the choke point 3 times. Once to see it, once to measure it, once to build it. The gap between the rock outcrops was 12 feet wide. The road curved slightly through it. A vehicle entering couldn't see the other side until committed. Above the gap, the ridge rose steep, rock and scrub. Good cover. Clear sight lines in both directions for 200 yards. He felled 2 cedars across the narrowest point. Enough to stop a truck. Not enough to look deliberate from a distance. Then he ran wire across the road surface 20 yards south, ankle height, connected to a marine flare from his truck's emergency kit. Tripwire. The flare would light up the gap when triggered. He found his position on the ridge above, a rock shelf with natural cover. He could see everything. He could speak and be heard by anyone standing below. 20 years of setting up tactical positions in terrain he'd never seen before. Different country, different war, same work. He left the sidearm in the cabin safe. This wasn't Afghanistan. If he fired a weapon on American soil against American civilians, the law that had ignored him would turn against him instantly. He needed control without escalation. Terrain, position, timing, authority. Jesse Weaver arrived at 4. Camp Lejeune sticker on the bumper. Leg brace on his left knee. Handshake that could crack walnuts. You're Shay. I'm Shay. Delilah said you needed help. Said a dog was involved. Jesse looked at the burned barn, the terrain, the ridge. I was coming this weekend anyway. You understand what's happening? Timber theft, murder cover-up, arson, dog napping. Jesse assessed the choke point with professional eyes. Where do you want me? South side, 200 yards below the gap. Eyes on the county road. Radio, channel 6. Jesse took the radio, tested it, looked at Colton. Whatever he saw was enough. In position by dark. He limped up the road, brace clicking, pace steady. Colton went back to the cabin, fed himself. Coffee, dark clothes, headlamp, radio, wire cutters in his jacket. He looked at the empty spot by the stove. The stick was still on the floor, right where Odin had left it. I'm coming, buddy. He locked the cabin, walked up the logging road in the last light, took position, settled in behind the rock shelf, waited. They came at 11. Jesse's voice on the radio, low, calm. 2 vehicles, Chevy first, flatbed behind. Something on the flatbed. Looks like a cage. Colton's chest tightened. A cage. Copy. Let them pass. Roger. Headlights appeared below. 2 trucks. Slow. The Chevy's cracked taillight visible from 200 yards. Dale. The Ford flatbed behind. Marcus. On the flatbed, caught in the headlight wash, a metal crate. Something moved inside it. Colton's breathing slowed. His heart rate dropped. Not because he willed it. The training decided for him. 20 years of it. The body knew what to do when the mind got quiet enough to let it. The Chevy reached the gap. Brake lights. Stopped. Dale got out. Flashlight. He walked to the felled trees, kicked a log, looked up the road. The hell is this? Marcus pulled up behind, both men standing in the gap, both looking at the blockage. The tripwire caught the Chevy's bumper. The flare ignited. White light exploded. Phosphorus. Blinding. Both men stumbled. Dale dropped his flashlight. Marcus grabbed his truck. The narrow gap between the outcrops became a lit stage with 2 disoriented men who hadn't expected an audience. Colton stepped from the tree line above. 20 feet of elevation. Clear sightline. Put the dog down and walk away. Dale spun. His hand went to his belt. A knife handle. Don't! 20 years of authority in one word. Federal agents are on their way up this road right now. Your hand moves another inch and they add armed assault to the timber theft and arson. Dale's hand stopped. Marcus stood by his truck, eyes adjusting, calculating, finding no exit. The Forest Service has everything: coordinates, stumps, mill receipts, extraction rights fraud. It's done. The only choice you have is whether you walk out or get carried. Dale looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the road behind them. One way in, one way out. The cage. Open it. Marcus moved first, walked to the flatbed, unlatched the crate door. Odin came out fast, not panicked, controlled. He hit the ground, shook once, and ran straight up the slope. 8 seconds. He reached Colton and sat at his left side, his usual position. Colton kept his eyes on the men below. His hand dropped to the dog's head. 1 second. 2. Good boy. Odin's tail moved once, then still, watching, ready. A third engine from the south, slower, heavier. A truck Colton hadn't seen. It stopped behind the flatbed. Door opened. Silas Redmond stepped out. He looked at the scene. Felled trees, dying flare, his men standing with their hands empty. Then up at the ridge. You've been busy, Shay. Busier than you know. Silas walked into the gap. Clean boots, tan jacket. He looked up at Colton with the expression of a man who'd controlled every conversation he'd ever been in and had just walked into one he couldn't. This doesn't have to go where you're taking it. It went there the day you killed Hank Graves. Something flickered across Silas's face, quick and gone. That was an accident. The cut angle says otherwise. The coordinates Hank buried say otherwise. The federal referral I filed says otherwise. A fourth vehicle, headlights from the north. A county cruiser. It pulled up behind Colton's position. Deputy Keene got out, walked down toward the gap. He looked at Silas, at Dale, at Marcus, at the cage on the flatbed, at Colton on the ridge with the dog. His right hand was shaking. The left was still. Deputy. Silas's voice was smooth, practiced. This man is trespassing on a road covered by my extraction rights. Remove him. Keene looked at Silas, then at Colton. 4 seconds of silence. Colton counted every one. The extraction rights are on his property, Silas. This road is his land. He's not trespassing. Keene's voice cracked, then steadied. You are? Silas stared at him. His body shifted, a small rearrangement of weight. Recalculating. Think carefully, Keene. I have been, for 3 years, since Hank. Since I stood at that funeral and told Delilah I was sorry and knew I was lying. Both hands were still now. He pulled the cuffs from his belt. Silas Redmond, turn around. From the south, more lights, 2 vehicles, federal plates, U.S. Forest Service. On schedule. Delilah had coordinated through Jesse on the radio. They'd been waiting at the junction. 2 agents, body armor, flashlights, badges. U.S. Forest Service, federal investigation. Nobody moves. The flare died. Only headlights remained. 5 vehicles pointing in different directions, shadows crossing the road. Silas stood in the gap with a deputy behind him and federal agents in front of him, and 3 years of crime unraveling in the mud. He looked up at Colton one last time. "You sold me the wrong piece of land, Silas." Keene cuffed him. The agents moved in. Dale and Marcus were walked to the federal vehicles without resistance. The cage was photographed. Evidence. Colton came down from the ridge, Odin at his side. The dog was calm now, loose, the way he got when the perimeter was clear. Jesse limped up from the south position. Hell of a show. Couldn't have done it without the Marine Corps. Damn right. Colton crouched, ran his hands over Odin. Legs, ribs, ears, paws. No injuries. No blood. Dirty coat, matted where the cage pressed. Thinner, but whole. "He's all right." Odin licked Colton's wrist once, then walked to the truck, jumped in the bed, lay down, closed his eyes. 82 pounds of dog who'd spent a day in a cage, and the first thing he did when it was over was go to his spot and sleep. Delilah's sedan came up the road. She'd been waiting at the junction. She parked and walked to Colton, looked at the dog sleeping in the truck bed, looked at Colton. She nodded once, small, firm. He nodded back. That was enough. Morning came cold and clear. First morning without fog in 2 weeks. Colton stood in the driveway at first light and looked at what was left. The barn frame, charred posts bare against a sky turning from gray to pale blue. Twisted tin on the ground, ash everywhere. A black rectangle where the floor used to be. It looked like a lot of places he'd been. FOBs after mortar attacks, villages after airstrikes. He'd learned a long time ago that what mattered wasn't what got destroyed. It was what you built after. He picked up a hammer from the cabin porch, walked to the fence, started pulling out the cut wire Dale had snipped 2 weeks ago. Then he began restringing, post by post, section by section. The wire was cold, his fingers stiffened. He kept working. Odin lay in the clearing, body loose, breathing even. He'd slept through the night for the first time in weeks. His morning perimeter check had been calm. 11 minutes, clockwise, same speed, same route. No pauses, no agitation. Just the old routine running the way it was supposed to. Jesse came out at 7. He'd slept on the cabin floor in a sleeping bag from his truck. He didn't say good morning. He picked up work gloves from the porch rail, walked to the barn frame, and started pulling debris. Charred boards, bent nails, broken glass. He stacked salvageable wood on one side and trash on the other. They worked in silence for 2 hours, Colton on the fence, Jesse on the barn. The work was the conversation. The only vocabulary they needed: show up, work, stay until it's done. At 9, a truck pulled up the driveway, then another, then a sedan. 3 vehicles, Oregon plates. The first truck had a bumper sticker, 22 a day. The second had a V, a veteran plate. The sedan had a Purple Heart license plate frame. 3 men got out. Different ages, different builds, different branches. Colton could tell by how they stood, by how they scanned the property before speaking, by how they looked at the burned barn and didn't flinch. Army, Navy, Marine. Jesse walked over, shook each hand. "You're early." "Delilah called us," the oldest one said. 50s, gray beard, ball cap with an anchor. "Said the retreat was accepting early arrivals. Said the owner could use hands." Colton stood by the fence with the hammer. He watched 3 strangers walk onto his property and look at the charred barn and the half-strung fence, and the dog in the clearing, and the man with the hammer. They understood. All of it. Without a single word of explanation, the burned barn told one story. The man still standing next to it told another. "Welcome to Pine Haven." The Navy man nodded. "Where do you want us?" Colton pointed to the barn frame. "Debris first. Clear down to the posts. Then we measure for new trusses." They went to work. No questions, no speeches. 5 veterans and a dog pulling charred wood and straightening nails, and doing the only thing any of them had ever known how to do when something broke. You assessed the damage, you made a plan, you rebuilt it. By noon, the debris was cleared. The barn frame stood bare against the sky, just the original posts, the ones that had been there for 80 years. The ones that survived because they were too old and too dense to burn. Delilah arrived at 12:30. She brought paperwork and coffee. The timber extraction rights clause had been flagged by the federal investigation. When Silas's case went to trial, the retained rights would revert to Colton under the state forfeiture statute. The logging road would be his. Fully. No loopholes. No access clauses. No more Silas. She set the papers on the cabin table. "Thank you. Thank your dog." He started digging. They stood in the cabin, close, the table between them covered in maps and records, and 3 years of truth finally surfaced. Colton looked at her hands. She looked at his. Neither moved. The nod said everything. Not now. Not yet. But not never. She left. He went back to work. The Navy man turned out to be a carpenter. He drew up a cut list for new trusses on the back of an envelope and said materials could be delivered from the county lumber yard in 2 days. Colton looked at the list, looked at the barn frame, looked at the carpenter. "You just got here 3 hours ago." The man shrugged. "I'm fast." By evening, the frame was cleaned and measured. Tomorrow they'd start cutting. Day after, raising walls. The week after that, a roof. Colton sat on the cabin porch as the sun went down. Odin lay beside him, head up, ears tracking the sounds of the valley. A truck on the county road far below. A woodpecker in the cedars. Wind through the canopy. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a place that belonged to him. Jesse sat on the other end of the porch, brace off, rubbing his knee. The 3 veterans had set up tents in the clearing. 2 were building a fire in the pit Colton had dug last month. The 3rd sat on a log with a beer, watching the flames, not talking, just present. Not bad for a first week. Retreat doesn't officially open until January. You're 3 months early. Jesse shrugged. We were in the neighborhood. All 4 of you. Delilah's convincing. Colton watched the fire in the clearing. 5 men and a dog and a burned barn and a piece of Oregon mountainside that had been through more in 2 weeks than most properties see in a century. He'd imagined the retreat differently. Finished cabins, a schedule on a corkboard, organized programs. Not a charred frame and tents in the mud, and strangers who showed up because a county clerk made phone calls. But this was how things got built. Not the way you planned, the way they happened. With whoever showed up, using whatever survived. Yeah. He looked at the clearing, at the men, at the fire. She is. Odin groaned softly, shifted, set his chin on his paws, eyes half closed, content for the first time in weeks, done working for the day. Colton rested his hand on the dog's shoulder, not petting, just contact. The fire crackled, the dark came in, the property held. Colton woke before the light, dressed in the dark, laced his boots by feel, reached for the cabin door. Odin was already there, standing, ears forward, tail level. He'd heard Colton's feet hit the floor and had been at the door before the second boot was tied. Let's go. They walked out into the cold, stars everywhere, no cloud cover. The temperature had dropped hard overnight, frost on the windshield, frost on the grass. The tents were dark, but not everyone was sleeping. Jesse stood at the edge of the clearing. Brace on. Jacket zipped. He fell in behind them without a word. Then the Navy man. Then the younger one. Then the one with the prosthetic hand. Nobody asked where they were going. They walked up the trail behind the cabin, up through the Douglas fir, past the stumps where Silas's crew had poached federal timber, past the switchback where Hank Graves died, higher, past the tree line, into the rock and scrub where the wind came unbroken from the east. The ridge. They reached the top as the light came. Not sunrise, the moment before, when the sky shifts from black to gray to the first pale blue along the horizon, when the mountains appear in layers, one range behind another, each lighter, each further away, stretching east toward a line you can see but can never reach. 5 men and a German shepherd, standing on a ridge in Oregon, looking at a valley that had tried to break every one of them in different ways and at different times, and hadn't finished the job. Nobody spoke for a long time. That was fine. Silence was the point. Silence was what they'd climbed for. The kind you can only find on high ground, with people who don't need you to explain what you're carrying, because they're carrying their own, and they know the weight. Odin sat at Colton's left side. His coat was damp from the climb, his breathing steady. He watched the valley with the same patient focus he gave everything. Present. Committed. Colton looked at the sky, at the mountains, at the fog lifting from the valley in slow columns. This is enough church for me. Nobody argued. The Navy man closed his eyes. Jesse leaned against a boulder. The younger veteran sat on a rock and put his hands on his knees and just breathed. The one with the prosthetic hand stood with his arms at his sides and watched the light fill the valley. Odin stood, shook his coat. Frost and water flew off in a brief halo. Then he started down the trail. Not fast, steady. 20 yards ahead, he stopped, turned, looked back at Colton, ears up, tail level, waiting, leading. Yeah. Colton stepped off the ridge. Gravel crunched under his boots. I'm coming. He followed the dog down the trail. Behind him, the others started walking. One by one. Jesse first, brace clicking. Then the Navy man. Then the rest. Back down the mountain. Toward the property. Toward the barn frame that needed trusses. Toward the fence that needed finishing. Toward the road that was theirs now. Odin stayed 20 yards ahead, looking back every few steps, making sure. Then forward, moving through the trees where the light was breaking through the canopy in long, bright bars. Gold on the needles. Gold on the trail. Gold on the coat of a dog who had never once needed to be told where home was. The dog kept walking. Colton kept following. Behind them, the sun cleared the Cascades. The valley filled with light. And the day began.